Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting episode of GovConHacks Live. Your hosts, Ashley Duell and Natasha Velez.
Hello, everybody.
And we are going to talk about pricing today. We've seen a lot of questions floating around in the Facebook communities and on our channels, and there's a lot of confusion out there. When's the right time? What do you have to take into consideration? How far ahead do you have to plan that? And, is there a template that maybe exists to help me with this? So we're going to kind of split it up. We're going to talk about price and products, and then we're going to talk about price and services. And if you would like to engage or ask questions, I am watching the YouTube channel. So the comment section is very accessible for me right now. I'm getting the hang of this thing. So please do drop your questions about pricing in the chat on YouTube. All right. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Now, there's
Yay.
definitely a difference, right? I mean, I'm certainly not the technical writer of the two of us. I do not have as much pricing experience as Natasha does. So, but I do want to kind of simplify it for you and let her get started with products.
Yeah, so every single pricing is different. But when you're just getting started, we don't have to overcomplicate it. Normally, it's time and materials, staffing, per diem, some for the healthcare staffing, and then there is also products. So when you are coming up with pricing, I'm just going to go straight to it. When you're coming up with pricing for products, um, obviously you have to come up with a basis of estimate. Assume that you need a roof for your house. How did you go about that? Government wants a roof. Let's just assume. You wouldn't just go on the first person or the first company or the first vendor you find. You would go out there and get a quote. I usually like the three is best method. Get three quotes, choose the most qualified, the most efficient, fastest, and well priced. Not the lowest price, but the most well priced. Granted, most things are LPTA, which is
Value.
lowest price to win, but you do get what you pay for, right?
Right.
So, and it's not always, I don't think that you should always, and chime in if you agree or not, but I don't think it's always the best to go with the lowest price, though I know it's the government does want cheap, right? They do. But you can negotiate. You can negotiate terms, you can negotiate pricing, especially if it's a BPA, which is a blanket purchase agreement. If you agree to buy in volume and start building, this is going to be your business, and you're going to be buying products. You want to create the relationship with the vendors, not just the customers, because your vendors ultimately are the one that's pricing you and could be pricing you out of the game. So it works both ways. And I would say at that point in time, you get your different pricing, you choose your best vendor. Vendor manage will be a separate course, but ultimately now you have your price for your roof. Let's say it's $20,000. We'll go simple. Um, you're going to create what we call a basis of estimate. You not only need this product, it's also going to come with either sales tax, you have to shipping. Is there any fees? Is there labeling? Is there any way that the government wants you to ship this product to them that you need to be conscientious of? Make sure you're reading your solicitation and your requirements and your compliance, because that's all really on you, not necessarily your vendor. It's on you as the prime. So with the pricing, if you have something to say, you can always
Let me
come.
interject right there. You touched on something that was a big topic of conversation in my group just within the last few months. And
Mhm.
the issue was, how do I price my contracts, not knowing whether or not the vendor or the supplier, rather, excuse me, the supplier of the product is going to be compliant with MilSpec standards? That causes a whole lot of confusion.
Yes.
Um, and believe it or not, and this might blow your mind, those contractors who are avid suppliers of products that do and are subject to MilSpec standards, either they have the ability to meet those standards in-house, or they find a MilSpec packaging facility that is close to the supplier. So think if you're sourcing products at the last minute and they require MilSpec standards, that's a lot of legwork that you got to do in a short period of time. If you
Right.
have to send that to the packaging facility, now you've got to account for that extra trip. You've got to account for the cost to package it. 9 times out of 10, you may or may not come in lowest price. So all of these factors should be taken into consideration in your go, no go analysis. And over time, you'll have the relationships with not only the suppliers, but also the MilSpec packaging facilities. And the lower you can negotiate, the more quantity you're doing, that's when you really kind of hit your sweet spot. Am I right?
Yeah, it is. And it's really important to know that if you do find yourself a vendor that is very familiar with the compliance of the government, you're going to hit yourself a sweet spot going forward because you can negotiate again a year contract. I've had people sit there and say, listen, can I get an open purchase order? I intend to buy this much for the year. They're willing to work with you. You're giving them business. And based on that quantity on top of it, I have a lot of people that just go online and Google and they're like Amazon, right? No. Find yourself someone like a CDW-G. They are a huge supplier for government. Um, you have a lot of suppliers that are specifically for the government. The government has pre-approved and loves them wholeheartedly. We will provide a list of all the vendors, a majority of the vendors that do supply for government hardware, software, and it's very compliant, and they will work with you to make sure that you have everything that's needed in your solicitation. So those are some things that might be super, super helpful. They might be priced a little higher because of that, but understand that you are saving money in the long run when it comes to, I have clients who are shipping items to their house and labeling it themselves and trying to figure it out because their vendors can't do that for them. It's not ideal. And so now you're paying for shipping to your home and shipping and packaging and everything else to your client, or to the government rather. So it's you want to kind of, and this is all part of the basis of estimate, you really want to kind of come down with your, how am I going to do this? Who's going to do this? And how much is it going to cost me? And that's where your basis of estimate essentially comes in. Um, Line item by line item, hardware, software, serial numbers, the cost to you, which we call direct cost. That is your direct cost, which is your gross profits. Everything that you're selling to the government is essentially your cost of goods sold. That, and then you go forward and you put in any sales tax, you put any shipping, and you try to keep track of all the costs that are going to be to you because that's all billable. Then we talk about rates.
The government's kind of sales tax exempt.
They
So
are.
in a lot of cases, you can get a waiver
You
to
can.
provide to your supplier to prove that tax exempt status. So be
It's
sure to
funny you
check the
say that. Someone brought
solicitation,
that up yesterday, asking about that too.
the waiver.
Yeah, you can also get a resale cert. And correct me if
Yes.
I'm wrong, but I know a lot of companies get a resale cert in their state. It doesn't work if you're buying products for yourself, but it's meant for if you intend to resell it to someone in your state. Am I right? Yeah.
I'm not sure about the state rule.
Okay.
I'll have to do a little bit of research on that.
I think
I'm,
it
for
only counts
example,
if you have a resale cert in the state that you're shipping it to. I think if it's out of state, it's different. So we'll have to come back and give you some information because I don't want to give
okay.
you inaccurate.
If there's somebody that needs to know that information, we'll be happy to find it for you for sure.
Yeah.
Um, and I personally do work with a lot of service contractors. So um, I do have a couple clients who sell products, but predominantly my client base are services. And pricing is one of those things that when you're in products, you're pretty lucky to figure out that if you're losing because of price, you know. If you know, you know. I mean, there's really on an LPTA only one way to lose a contract, luckily.
It's
But when
right.
we're talking best value, there's weights, different weights assigned, and your pricing in your commercial space, um, the way that you price what you do may or may not work in the government space. So you might have to restructure and price a different way, accounting for allowable and unallowable costs. So these two worlds, when it comes to pricing, are completely different. Pricing for LPTA is a little different than best value. And then also there are different factors when you're selling products to take into consideration, like those MilSpec standards,
Right.
that come into play. And all of those costs essentially are your costs. And then trying to squeeze in a profit margin on top of that, sometimes your supplier is planning on bidding on that contract.
Oh, that
Sometimes your
happens so many
supplier,
times.
so many times, they're going to inflate the quote that they give you anyway.
Hmm.
If you have enough of a lead time and you can tell who the incumbent is on that contract, don't call them for a quote. Like, just
Hmm.
I would just
Yeah.
no go it. If the only supplier that supplies that product has had that contract for the last 5 or 10 years, I mean,
I had someone do that with Dell. It was like, how are you going to get lower pricing than Dell on Dell? Like, I'm just saying, let it
the
go.
only value proposition there is if you are like a service disabled veteran, or if the
Yeah,
government has a vested interest to use that particular purchase toward their small business set asides. And even then, they're going to go with a certified partner of Dell, a value added reseller, not necessarily just someone who wants to put themselves in the middle and say, hey, I'm gonna cut myself in on some profit over here.
correct. Because essentially, and that goes back to the vendor management and having a relationship with your vendors, become a reseller, be a distributor, be a part of that partnership. There's a lot of partnership programs that a lot of vendors have.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
you get a lot of discounts too, which is really nice.
Things that come to mind, there's ServiceNow, there's, secure cloud file transfer software. There's a lot of softwares out there, and the data's free, guys. It's free on usaspending.gov, FPDS. The data's out there. You can detect which softwares the government are already using.
Mhm.
So for those of you with an IT background, being a value-added reseller and learning how to install that software is a benefit to actual, manufacturer of that software, because they're not interested. They just want the licensing. They're not interested in installing. Same with the hardware. If the government buys this big computer setup, you think they're going to sit there and install it on their own? Probably not. They're probably going to want you to come in and install it. So there are areas of opportunity there where you're adding value to a purchase, and you are pricing then for the products and the service. So there is
Right.
a little bit of overlap in these hemispheres, but I'll let
I
you
would,
go on to services so I don't yap us out of time.
no, you're good. Do me a solid and share this screen. I'm gonna do it through a
Oh,
template that we're gonna provide to
go
you
ahead.
all for pricing. And here we go. Just let me know if you can see that.
I can see it. However,
Beautiful.
I'm not sure if it's coming. Oh, yep, there it goes. We can see it on the live.
Perfect. All right, folks. So this is what we're going to provide for you for free. This is something that I've utilized for, mid-sized corporations, large corporations, small businesses. Um, it's obviously customizable because you all have different industries and there will be differences. There will be GSA, there will be IDIQs, there will be you're the sub and your prime has target burden rates that they want from you. It changes, right? It's not the answer be all to everything, but it's a good template to start with. And then you can customize it based on your industry as you grow and learn and evolve. So we start with multiple tabs. I love Excel. I come from a very CFO background, so I'm going to tell you my nerd Excel formulas. Everything's already in here with formulas. You don't have to touch or change anything unless you want to customize it to your needs. But ultimately, it all feeds into the summary. So the things to consider: materials that you're going to be purchasing, that's hardware and software, any ODCs, which is other direct costs that are not in this category of material, subcontractors or vendors, rather, anyone that you're partnering along and bringing along for the ride that are going to charge you for a portion of the work. And then labor, that's your direct labor, anyone that you're hiring or even yourself and what that looks like. And then it all pretty much subtotals up here. We even have a section here for travel. because for those that do engineering, you might have a travel component where you have to go do a site survey or an installation of some sort. That is also accounted for as well. And then ultimately, it will give you your direct costs, which is the cost to you, and then your billable. And your billable is essentially the revenue that you're receiving at the end. And then obviously revenue minus expenses is your gross profit, so that's your take home. So we have a tab here for LCATs. LCATs is labor categories, essentially your service. So every individual has a labor category. Let's assume an engineer. You would put in the engineer as a labor category. This is a qualification section. You can put, if the government sometimes requires a 5 to 10-year senior engineer, you can kind of put that in there to help you. Mind you, this is an internal template. You can put the average salary. I normally do a comp analysis. You can go on salary.com, pull what engineers with 5 to 10 years worth of experience in the city and state of the place of performance is, or you can look at GSA.
GSA Calc, yeah, it's my
Helps.
favorite.
So however you do that, I'll plug in, let's assume, I think engineers right now are making anywhere from like 125,000 starting. There's a vast market. So with that being said, it automatically calculates the hourly rate for this engineer for you, your taxes, your SUTA, your FICA, and then it has some back-end taxes we'll go over later. Your direct fringe. So your direct fringe can be ultimately adjusted with health and welfare. I won't go too far into SCA, but sometimes you'll see a contract or a solicitation rather that states it has SCA compliance regulations. SCA is a service contract employee, and the Service Contract Act requires you to provide a certain pay. That's why they attach what's called a wage determination to the solicitation. Let's assume engineer, it'll say something like you can't pay them any less than $50 an hour. Cool. We've got that. But you also have to pay them $4.66 towards their health and welfare. What does that mean? Health and welfare, medical, dental, vision, PTO, not necessarily sick leave, they exempt that sometimes, disability, life insurance, anything that you pay towards your employees is health and welfare. Not anything that the employee pays, everything that the employer pays. So this automatically pulls what your direct fringe is and provides you a fully loaded billing rate. So your direct cost is $60.10 for that engineer. That's how much they're making hourly. That's how much you're making, $97.81. Now I have a big component of wanting to make sure, as I'm sure everybody else does, I want to see my gross profit margins. I want to see how much money I'm making because top line's cool, but we all know that's not our take home. After you're done paying your engineer, what is my take home? Let's assume it's a full year of work. Let's assume they have 80 hours. Let's assume we give them federal holidays off. Let's assume they have sick leave. Let's do all that. The hours for the year result to 1,933 hours of workable, direct, and billable costs. That is your proposed revenue for the year. That is how much you're spending on direct fringe for your employee. That is the direct labor that your employee has made for the year. And that is your gross profit margins. And then that is, I put it in cash and then I put it in percentage. So you have your gross profit margins, you're making about a 25%. Now for the government, I know everybody's like, what's my multiplier, right? We call them wrap rates here. And your wrap rate, ultimately the government likes it when you're like 20 to 35%, depending on what you're selling. I wouldn't suggest going past 35% gross profit margins because then it's not priced fair and reasonable. Remember, these are taxpayer dollars. The government really does care about where that money is going to. Of course, they want you to make a profit. They just don't want you to make 100% of it. You know, they don't want 90% profit margins. It has to be fair. It has to be reasonable to be acceptable. And essentially, you don't want to outbid yourself by being too high. So you have to be reasonable. But ultimately, that's how you would provide service, which is labor. Um, I will also go into a little more about your burden rates. So here, your burden rates are filled with indirect rates. Your indirect rates result in your fringe, which we discussed, health, welfare, essentially, everybody gets it. Overhead, it's your office supplies, it's your facility, it's your insurance, it's internet, software costs, it's all the things that you have internally to keep yourself operational that has nothing to do with the actual project. It has everything to do with keeping your company afloat so that you can still manage the project and exist essentially. G&A is your accounting, your consulting, your HR, your management, your BD, your everything. It's all the general administrative costs of running a company. Your fee is what we call a risk and profit. It's a little bit of both because ultimately, if you don't price correctly or you make a boo-boo or you don't meet a deliverable, you're going to eat into your profits. That's your risk margin. But what's nice about that is that you're also still covering yourself. You're covering your fringe. So it's not just 10% profit on top of the labor and all the direct costs. It's you got some 5%, you got 10%, you got 15%, you got some things to kind of cover you for other things. So if you have any mistakes or anything that eats into your costs or your profit margins, it's really just eating in here. Now, this ultimately calculates your wrap rate, which is what you're essentially billing the customer. This is the money to you. I created some industry standards. It's as of today, this is kind of, and this is honestly up for interpretation because a lot of people fight back and say, no, it's this, no, it's that. It's whatever you like. But ultimately, this is the methodology I go by. So resale, we're going to do the resale, middleman approach. I know like 85% of you love it, right? You can't make that much profit on it. So I'm going to say that that's the fair margin. 1.10 is where is your baseline you want to be in. So essentially 10%, right? Hardware, government likes a 20% margin. So 1.2 wrap rate. Labor off-site, the government's facility. This is if you are hiring individuals, they're not going to work at your facility, they're going to work at the government's facility. They're going to work at their base or their location or office. It saves you money because you don't have to have all the overhead of managing. You don't have to have the hardware. You don't have to give them laptops. They don't need SharePoint access. They don't even need an email half the time. It's saving costs to you. You're essentially just staffing.
Most of the
Labor
time
on
they have to
site.
have a security clearance, but
Yeah. But even that's many times, even the government will cover that too.
yeah, they'll
Many
sponsor.
times they'll do a cat card and they'll do the whole back because they want to be in control of the people that are on base. Um, Even if there's a secret clearance, they even pay for that too. And that's all back end costs. That's all costs that we're initially putting in here to create these rates to cover yourself. It's not a direct billable. You can't tell the government, I'm charging you for this. But you can ultimately through the back end indirect rates. So on site, which is your contractor facility, that's your facility. If you have to open, let's say, a warehouse to receive products for the government, that costs a lot of money to you. That's a lot of overhead. That's a lot of G&A. That's a lot of fringe. That's because you need people that are not going to just provide the materials. You need people that are going to support HR. You're going to need people that are accounting. You're going to need people that are pickers and packers and shipping costs. There's a lot of components you can't possibly even think about sometimes. So you want to cover yourself because ultimately anything you miss will eat into your profits, and you don't want that. So I always keep it around a 1.5. It's a baseline, don't go higher. Most people are not at a 1.5, they're at a 2, but that's okay. 1.5 still is the industry standard. And that's honestly, if you're higher than that, that's a conversation for your CFO or your bookkeeper or me later on a call. So
Shameless,
ultimately, I always a shameless plug.
shameless plug.
So
You said the wrap, we have a question on YouTube. The wrap rate was the government version of the multiplier.
Multiplier. Yep. So whenever you hear wrap rate, it's just our way of saying multiplier, honestly. Um, I know there's a lot of people that say, oh, just use 20%, 25%. That will get you far for maybe like your first or second contract. But as you start to grow, we have what's called DCAA, and there's regulations, there's compliance. These wrap rates aren't imaginative, they come from somewhere. Eventually, when you start actually winning and getting contracts in, you're going to start obtaining these costs, and your profit and loss statement from your accounting software will ultimately generate that fringe overhead and G&A. So the government will be able to see if those numbers that you're billing them are actually the numbers that you're incurring. They will have to match at some point. So your indirect rates will eventually have to be realistic and not made up and not guessed upon. It's really good to start that practice now. Because if you get just used to throwing profit margins in there and then you get audited and then you get a stop work order because you're not meeting your audit and then you owe
And
money to the
terminated,
government, what?
and then you got to pay money back, and
Then
then
back
you'll
pay
never get another contract again.
ever.
It's one
So
of those
let's
things
just
you just
start.
want to do it right the first time.
Knowledge is power, folks.
Yes,
Knowledge is power. But if
yes.
you guys have any issues with this, because we only get 30 minutes, but ultimately, we're here to help you. I'll put as much notes as possible to try to kind of guide you. But you have a tab for everything. You have a basis of estimate, which is your BOM, your parts and your materials, any terms, quantities, pricing, it all comes together and does it for you. Subcontractor agreements and keeping track of your ODCs. You can even for those folks that do, service, you can have a level of effort. How many FTEs, which is full-time employees, will you need for each assignment or each task based on labor category and price? All pulls. So, and then of course, travel. If you have a location, city, state, airfare, daily lodging costs, it all calculates here for you so that you can have an amount to bill the client. So I hope that this will be super helpful to you. And if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact myself or Ashley so that we can walk you through it.
This was an excellent demonstration, and that spreadsheet is something that is literally going to save our audience hours and hours of time. So,
It even does your
sincerely thank
escalation.
you for putting this
What?
together.
And if you need more tabs, girl, I got you. Excel queen.
See, I look at your spreadsheet and all I see is a Monday board.
I love Monday stuff. I'm learning, I'm getting there.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I do not see. Oh, we do have some questions in the chat. So before we close, is there a good software that will prepare you for DCAA compliance?
Oh,
So,
so there is, but honestly, I would say you can go to the DCAA website and I'll plug that in as well for you guys.
about here.
There's an indirect rate compliance template in there. So you can literally just plug in your P&L so it can tell you what your rates are for you and calculate them. There are softwares like Uninet and CostPoint, but they're really, really pricey. If I had to choose, it'd be Uninet. It's an accounting software, ERP system, CRM system. It's pretty impressive. It's specifically for government contracting. Um, and it makes sure and ensures that you're compliant. But honestly, QuickBooks is compliant. You can utilize it. You just have to set it up for compliance. So do your research, and look up what that
Do
looks like.
I do understand that QuickBooks is going through a bit of a change
They are.
effective July. They're doing away with the desktop version.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, the plugin that was required for the desktop version to automate the DCAA compliance in QuickBooks is no longer going to be available because it's not available for the online version.
I think that's
So
going to be
do
a problem then.
confirm. I'm not a CPA, I'm not a GovCon accountant, but I did hear that from one. So do make sure that if
They
you will be
are,
subject to it, that you check.
the compliance is that they want you to do desktop. And so they're supposed to be removing desktop and putting it to cloud, and that's not compliant because you can easily be hackable at that point.
Right, right.
So that is an issue. Um, I would say that you can still use QuickBooks until you start actually winning. Then when you start winning, you might want to start pricing in, and this is where we kind of go with that back end burden rate,
Hmm.
increase your G&A costs. Assume that you're probably going to take on a new expense, which is accounting software. If I had to suggest one, I would say Uninet. Uninet accounting software is also a CRM software. It's a budgeting software. It's a project management software. It's a little more pricey than QuickBooks, but it's 100% DCAA compliant, and it will do your timesheets. It will do your, accounting for you. It'll make sure that you're compliant. And the service itself is super, super helpful, and everybody's really nice. So do your research, look around for DCAA compliant accounting softwares because I only know of the three right now, and those are usually because, it's the only ones that
They're the
are,
most popular.
those are,
Uninet's the one I hear most often. I do know that it, can be a little bit of a sticker shock for a new small business. But keep in mind, guys, that not every contract is subject to DCAA compliance. So even when you provide services, if you start staffing FTEs, for example, yes, absolutely, you are going to be held accountable for that. Um, but not all service contracts contain. That's a whole nother story
yeah,
for
like
another
products.
episode.
Products are not really huge on it. So you won't see that too much unless you're got a 5-year, project where then they're like, we want to see your ins and outs and your whole
Yeah.
inventory
They want to
system.
see your guts,
Yeah.
everything but the kitchen sink,
That
basically.
is like, yeah, okay, I got you.
And your firstborn. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are out of time for the evening. I hope this was valuable. Natasha and I are going to both be posting the template that you see here to our websites. I'll make sure that when it's ready, I'll post it in the description of this live session on YouTube and also in the guide section of our Facebook group. So you can
Yes.
find it in a lot of different places. No excuses.
Yes. And if you have any questions, I'm always happy to message on Facebook Messenger and answer very quickly. I don't mind. It's my
Thank you
area.
again, everybody. And thank you, Natasha, for joining me this evening. And you guys have a wonderful weekend. Take
Bye,
care.
everybody.
Bye.